Before we begin, I want to talk a little bit about the types of lighting that we can use to paint our models. First, there's zenithal lighting. It's what I use most of the time for painting individual miniatures. You'll probably seen me use zenithal highlighting in some of my other videos. But for larger models, we can also use what's called panel lighting to illuminate the centers of individual panels, and we can also use modulation, where you alternate transitioning from light to dark on each individual panel. You can see an example of each of these types of lighting here in this picture. But for this particular model, we're going to be using panel lighting and modulation. That's because of the contrast that they produce. It really helps set the miniature off, particularly on larger vehicles. So with that being said, let's get on to the painting. I pre-primed the Stormraven using Games Workshop's Mephiston Red spray primer. Now we're going to start lighting our model by highlighting the uppermost edges in individual panels. As you go, don't put the paint on too heavy. You want to slowly build up the highlight. As I go, I pick out details on the model that I want to highlight. Because I don't always know exactly how I'm going to paint a model from start to finish, I highlight almost everything. Sometimes this means, though, that some of the work that I do will get covered up later by another color. But I don't really mind this because I like having the flexibility of being able to decide how to paint the model as I'm going along. Sometimes inspiration will hit you as the paint job starts to develop. This way you end up with a really cool paint job. You can start to see some of the individual highlights that I'm laying down set off some of the details. Emphasizing areas of the model with highlights, especially on larger models, can really set the model off. Here you can see me highlighting one of the larger panels. I slowly build up a highlight at the top of the panel, fading it out as I go down towards the bottom of the panel. Since we normally won't be seeing the bottom of the model, I don't go too crazy with the highlights. I just pick out some of the interesting details and I emphasize them. Here I start using the modulation technique. I highlight the upper section of the panel while leaving the lower section darker. You'll see me remove the masking tape and then highlight the upper section of the adjoining panel. I really like this technique. It isn't realistic lighting, but it really makes the model pop when it's finished. use this technique, either mask off the adjoining panel or tilt the model, as you can see me doing here, when you spray, to keep from getting overspray on the adjoining panel and ruining the effect. Here we see the highlights that we've just laid down. Now we start our second highlight. This time we narrow down our focus to the brighter sections from our first highlight, while taking care not to completely cover our first highlight. Don't be afraid to really push some of these highlights. The contrast between the light and dark sections of the panels really helps our model pop. Here we start the modulation process again, really pushing the highlights on the far edge of each of the panels. I wanted to pause the video here and point out how the modulation technique is really giving the model a cool look. By alternating panels with bright highlights next to the darker section of the adjoining panel really helps set the model off and give it an amazing look. Don't be afraid to be creative when you paint. Think outside the box. Do something a little bit different. Picking out areas that you think look cool and really emphasizing them can really help your finished model stand out. When painting areas of a model that are seldom seen, such as the bottom of this Stormraven, don't be afraid to really push the highlights. This can make seldom seen details really stand out. see me going back to the modulation technique again. This time, however, I had to use masking tape on the adjoining panel so that I didn't get overspray on it and ruin the effect. Here you can see me being a little creative again, not strictly painting each panel the same way. I just randomly highlighted sections trying to make them look interesting. And here's our Stormraven with the second highlight completed. To make painting the model easier, I just tacked the wings, canopy, and other details in place so that I got a consistent main color over the whole model. By removing these sections, I can more easily paint different parts of the model. Models like this Stormraven have lots of interesting little panel details that I like to pick out and paint a contrasting color. I just think it brings more interest to the model as a whole. Here I've masked off sections of the model that I don't want to get overspray on. I hand painted the areas that were too detailed to mask off and just sprayed the rest. Here's the completed contrasting black color. Here we're going to highlight the engine pods with a simple silver dry brush. When dry brushing, you don't want to overload your brush with paint. Simply dip your brush in the paint and wipe the excess off on a paper towel until almost no paint comes off the brush. Then gently drag your brush over the details of the part you're highlighting, in this case the engine pod, giving it a highlight. And here we have the first engine pod dry brush completed. Now we add a second brighter dry brush highlight to the engine pods. This time apply the paint a little more sparingly so as to not cover the first highlight completely. Now we're going to paint all the silver details using Games Workshop's Lead Belcher. Here's the silver-coated thruster pod. Now we're going to shade all of our details using Games Workshop's non-oil acrylic wash. Here's the completely shaded thruster pod. Next we're going to highlight all of the silver details by dry brushing them with Games Workshop's Necron compound. And here's the completed wing assembly. Now we're going to shade the model a little bit by using an oil wash. If you've seen any of my other videos, you know that I like using oil washes in certain situations. Panel lines on vehicles are a good candidate for oil washes because they wick into the recesses and are easy to clean off if you make any mistakes. Our finished wash looks a little messy, but fear not, we're going to clean it up in the next step. Oil washes, even after they have dried, are easily removed by using mineral spirits. Simply dip a Q-tip in the spirits and gently wipe away any of the excess wash. The Q-tip won't reach all the way into the recess, leaving the wash that we want left behind. Here we can see our shaded panel lines. Here is our fully assembled and completely painted Stormraven. I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial and found it useful. If you have any comments or questions, please feel free to leave them below. If you'd like to see more painting tutorials like this one, please subscribe to my channel. We will be posting many more painting tutorials in the coming weeks. And don't forget to hit that like button.